The Walsh family, Andrew, Lisa, and their 10-year-old daughter Emma, lived a very ordinary life in a small house on the outskirts. Andrew worked as an electrician, Lisa ran a local bakery, and Emma went to school. Their days were monotonous but stable: breakfast, work, school, dinner in front of the TV and sleep. One morning, everything changed. Andrew woke up at 6:30 a.m. as usual to get ready for work. But something was wrong. There was no birdsong outside the window, just an unusual silence. When he went down to the kitchen, he noticed that the clock on the wall had stopped at exactly 7 o'clock. "Lisa, is your watch broken again?" He called out, but did not hear an answer. The wife appeared a minute later, looking worried. "I've already changed the batteries. They just stopped." Emma came down from the top floor, fiddling with her stuffed rabbit. "Dad, I think I've seen this before," she said, and paused, as if afraid to admit it. The family considered it a strange coincidence and decided not to dwell on it. But the day began to repeat itself. Over and over again. Andrew woke up at exactly 6:30, and there was still silence outside the window. Lisa fried the same eggs, and Emma started complaining about déjà vu. "It's probably fatigue," Lisa was saying. "We all just need to rest." However, it was not possible to rest. When the clock reached midnight, all three of them found themselves in their beds, as if the previous 24 hours had not existed. With each new repetition, there were small changes. Little things that might have seemed random began to alarm them. The doors that had creaked earlier were now closing silently. Food that no one had eaten was missing from the refrigerator. Fingerprints appeared on the bathroom mirror that shouldn't have been there. Andrew began to notice more and more how strangely his wife and daughter were behaving. Lisa at some point began to claim that the neighbor's cat, whom they saw every day, had changed. "He didn't have a white stripe on his back yesterday," she insisted, pointing at the animal sitting by the fence. Emma, meanwhile, began to spend more time at the window, peering at the empty road. "Mom, Dad, she's changed," the girl said one day, pointing to a tree in the yard. It wasn't that big before. Andrew didn't know how to react. He tried to convince himself that it was all just stress or a strange prank, but every day it became less logical. Andrew decided to figure out what was going on. First, he started a notebook, writing down all the events of each day. He recorded the time, the actions of family members and any oddities. For the first few repetitions, it helped. He felt that he was at least a little in control of the situation. But soon it stopped working too. Every morning, the recordings disappeared as if they had never existed. "It's just a dream," he whispered to himself, but deep down he knew it wasn't true. Lisa was falling into a stupor more and more often, and Emma seemed to get used to the repetitive day. One day at dinner, she calmly stated, "I don't think it's going to end." Andrew felt his stomach clench. "What are you talking about, honey?" "What is it?" he asked cautiously. "We are here forever." Lisa dropped her fork and looked at her daughter. "Emma, don't say that. We'll figure something out." But the girl just shrugged and went back to her mashed potatoes as if nothing had happened. The next night, Andrew woke up to a loud noise. Someone was knocking on the door. He rushed downstairs, but there was no one on the threshold. Instead, he found a piece of paper attached to the door from the inside. "How many times are you going to pretend this isn't happening? Open your eyes, Andrew." He clutched the paper in his hand, feeling a wave of panic wash over him. When he returned to the bedroom, he couldn't sleep. The next day, the first serious failure occurred. Andrew went out into the yard to check if something had changed. And then he realized that the fence around the house, which he saw every day, had become higher. So much so that now it was impossible even to look beyond it. "Is this a joke?" He muttered, but there was no answer. When he returned to the house, he heard strange noises from the basement. It was Emma. She was standing in front of the washing machine, which was filled, something Andrew couldn't immediately make out. "What are you doing here?" "What is it?" he asked, but the girl only smiled. "I'm playing." Andrew decided not to panic, but soon his patience ran out. "Lisa, we need to do something," he shouted in the evening, when they gathered again for dinner. "I do not know what the hell this is, but you can no longer sit idly by." "And what do you suggest?" Lisa snapped. "We've already tried everything." Emma shrugged again. "Why are you arguing? Nothing will change anyway." These words turned out to be the last straw. Andrew began to tear down furniture, break down walls, look for at least some way out. He found a trapdoor under the carpet in the living room. The hatch led into a small tunnel that ended in a locked door. There was a combination lock on it. Lisa, who had followed him down, looked at Andrew hopefully. "Do you think this is the way out?" "There should be." But the lock required a 4-digit code. Andrew went back upstairs, searched the house for clues. Eventually, he noticed the clock. They always showed the same time, 7 o'clock. "This has to be it," he muttered. He entered 0700. The door clicked, but did not open. Instead, a mechanical voice began to be heard in the room. "The code is confirmed. The repetition time has been increased." The next morning, the day really changed. But instead of the usual events, horrors began to happen. At 6:30, the doorbell rang. Andrew opened it, but there was a man standing in the doorway with empty eyes. He didn't say a word, but began to slowly move into the house. Andrew slammed the door, but the man kept knocking. "It's them," Emma said calmly, sitting at the table. "Who are they?" Andrew shouted, grabbing his daughter by the shoulders. Emma didn't answer. During the day, strangers kept coming. They didn't break in, but their presence became more and more ominous. Andrew realized that he had to act quickly. Andrew was sitting on the living room floor, his back against the cold wall. The booming knocking outside continued, but he tried to ignore it. For the first time, the man wondered, what if everything that is happening is not a trap, but something more significant? Some kind of message? His gaze fell on Emma, who was serenely playing with a doll by the sofa. The girl seemed calm, as if these recurring days had become her new reality. Lisa, on the other hand, was rushing around the house like a caged animal, shouting incoherent threats into the void. "We drove ourselves in here," Andrew muttered. Lisa stopped, her eyes flashing with rage. "What did you just say?" "We're here for a reason," he continued without looking up. "This is not a trap or a punishment. This, test." "You're completely crazy," Lisa snorted. "A test of what? How many people can stand in this hell?" Andrew thought about it. Everything that happened resembled an artificially created cycle. Repetition, increased pressure, inability to escape. But why? "Have you noticed how we change?" he asked. "What are you talking about?" "We stopped being who we were." "You're yelling at Emma." "I lost control." "And she?" Andrew pointed to his daughter, who was already standing next to them by that time. "She's resigned. Because she's a child. She just doesn't understand that we're locked up like rats." Emma suddenly spoke, looking directly at her father. "Or maybe you don't understand." Andrew and Lisa exchanged glances. "What do you mean, honey?" "What is it?" he asked softly. "You're always looking for a way out, like there's something better out there," the girl said, her voice sounding surprisingly mature. "Or maybe this is all we have." These words silenced Andrew. The next day, he decided to test her hypothesis. Instead of looking for a way out or trying to change what was happening, he started just watching. He noticed how Emma chose the same doll every morning, as if trying to keep something constant in this chaos. How Lisa makes coffee over and over again, as if this action helps her stay afloat. And how he walks aimlessly around the house, still hoping to find answers. But no answers appeared. Instead, new disruptions began in the evening. The knocking on the door got louder. Now it didn't stop even at night. Figures began to flicker outside the windows, but when Andrew got closer, there was no one there. The food in the kitchen disappeared immediately after it was put on the table. Andrew tried to go outside, but found that now the doors wouldn't open at all. "We've gone too far," he muttered. "What does this mean?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. "This is not a test. It's a mirror," he replied, looking straight into her eyes. "It shows us what we are afraid of." "Afraid of what?" "Myself." Emma didn't say a word that day. She sat on the floor by the window and looked out at the garden, which always remained unchanged. When Lisa tried to talk to her, the girl just shook her head in silence. And at night everything changed. Andrew woke up to the sound of footsteps. Someone was walking slowly down the corridor. He looked at Lisa, but she was asleep. Emma was also lying in her bed, but her eyes were open. "Emma?" She didn't answer. Andrew got up and headed for the bedroom door. It was dark outside, but he could hear footsteps retreating down the stairs. He followed the sound, feeling fear squeeze his chest. He saw a silhouette in the kitchen. It was Emma. "What are you doing here?" "What is it?" he asked, but the girl did not answer again. She was standing in front of the refrigerator, open and empty. "They took everything," she said at last. "Who?" Emma turned around, her face serious. "They don't want us to think we can leave." Andrew felt a chill on the back of his neck. "Why do you say that?" "Because it is so." The next morning was different. Inscriptions appeared on the wall in the living room. "How much longer can you take it? Do you see what's going on? Accept it, otherwise you won't come out." Andrew tried to erase them, but they wouldn't disappear. Lisa started to go crazy. "It's all your business. You're digging too much, looking for something, and instead you're only making it worse." "I'm not doing this," he shouted back. Emma said her piece again. "Maybe if you stop fighting, it will end." Those words triggered something in Andrew's head that he was still afraid to admit. He wondered if all he really needed to do was stop trying. Andrew felt his nerves stretched to the limit by the minute, like a string about to snap. The loud knocking outside the door was no longer frightening, it was annoying. The inability to leave the house, the constant repetition of the same day, it was all unbearable. But something new began to manifest itself in this monotony. On the third day, the inscriptions on the walls were replaced by strange patterns. They looked as if they had been clawed, deep, chaotic lines that suggested bestial instincts. Lisa, noticing them, stopped abruptly, holding a mug of coffee. Did you do that?" Her voice was full of disbelief. "No," Andrew replied, examining the carvings carefully. "They appeared on their own." Emma came closer, reached out and touched one of the lines. "It's not an accident," she said softly. "Are you starting your riddles again?" Lisa snapped irritably. But Emma didn't back down. "It's like a map," she whispered. "We need to understand where it leads." Andrew began to look for meaning in the chaos. Each new day brought additional lines and symbols. He noticed that they were forming geometric shapes, and perhaps this was a way to leave a message. On the fourth day, the lines began to look like words. "The choice is made." Andrew felt like something was turning over inside him. "What's the choice? Who made it? Do you see this?" he asked Lisa. She just nodded, her hands shaking. I don't understand what they want, she whispered. Maybe we made the choice without knowing it, Andrew suggested. Emma, who was sitting nearby, put her own back in. The choice is to stay here, or give up. These words sounded so simple that it seemed absurd. Surrender to what? Lisa asked. Emma looked at her, her eyes completely calm. To myself. Andrew thought about it. In recent days, he increasingly felt like a stranger in his own body. Thoughts became confused, the memory of the past blurred during the day. What if it wasn't the house that locked us in, but us, he thought. The thought haunted him. He began to notice strange details. For example, the fact that Lisa always cooked the same breakfast, without even noticing it. Or the fact that outside the window in the garden, the same branch was always broken, no matter what he tried to fix it. Emma seemed to know more than she was saying. Emma, what do you see? What is it? He asked one evening when Lisa had gone to bed. I see you, she replied simply. Us? You're trying to run away, but you don't know what you're running from. These words made him freeze. Should we be here? What is it? He asked cautiously. No, Emma replied, her voice sounding almost cold. You have to understand why you are here. The next day, everything started to fall apart. The walls began to crack, the ceiling seemed to tilt lower, and the light from the windows disappeared. Lisa screamed, rushing around the house. We can't stay here. We're going to go crazy. Andrew stood in the center of the living room, looking at the cracks appearing. This is not a house. It's us. What? We keep ourselves here. Lisa stopped, looking at him. Do you hear what you're saying? It's not us. It's some kind of system. No. We created this system. You're afraid to go out because you think it's worse outside. I'm afraid because I don't know what's in there. Emma stood at the door, looked at them both and said, as long as you are afraid, the day will never end. Something inside Andrew finally broke down. He sat down on the floor, put his head in his hands and said softly, we have to stop being afraid. What? Lisa came closer. It's impossible. Do you see? We are not afraid of home, but of ourselves. What we can do. What we have already done. Emma came closer and sat down next to him. If you understand this, the door will open. Lisa looked at them in horror. And if she's wrong? Andrew looked at her. Then this day will go on forever. Andrew felt his heart tighten. All of Emma's words echoed in his head, penetrating every cell of his consciousness. He knew she wasn't wrong. Something in himself, in his fears and doubts, kept them all here, locked in this endless cycle. Lisa couldn't figure out what was going on, but her eyes began to lose confidence. It wasn't just a feeling, it was knowledge. They were not prisoners at home, but prisoners of their fear. Emma, you're saying that we created this system. But how? Why? Why can't we just leave? Lisa asked, her voice filled with despair. Emma was silent for a while, and then her eyes clouded over, as if she was looking somewhere into a distant, unknown future. Because the moment you first felt fear, you chose to stay. And so it is with all of you. These words hung in the air. Andrew looked at her, and his mind began to collapse under the weight of the realization. He remembered all his attempts to escape. But they always proved futile. He tried, but every time something brought him back. He couldn't figure out what was holding him back. Lisa turned abruptly to Emma. But if we created all this, can't we just cancel it? Can't we change our reality? Emma just shook her head. It's not a matter of cancellation. It's a matter of awareness. You can't change what you don't understand. Silence engulfed the room. Andrew stood there, not knowing what to do. He felt his gaze getting lost in the void, in the dark corners of the room, which seemed more and more alien. He knew that they couldn't just be objects, that it was all part of something bigger. Something that they themselves have created. Suddenly, from far away, from behind the walls, a strange sound was heard, a sound similar to the sound of the wind, but with some kind of metallic echo. He was coming from somewhere deep inside the house, as if something big was moving. This can't be happening," Lisa exclaimed. Andrew looked into her eyes. He knew she wasn't afraid of what would happen next. She was afraid that they would not be able to break this circle. And then, as if answering his inner question, Emma got up and walked to the door. "The door will open when you realize that it does not exist." Andrew felt his body paralyze. He had to do it. He should have understood. But what if he's wrong? What if it's all just an illusion and they'll never be able to get out? He went to the door, feeling how hard it was for him to take this step. Everything inside him resisted. His whole being was afraid to go out there, into the void, beyond what they knew. But he knew that if he didn't take this step, the cycle would continue forever. With each passing moment, the silence grew thicker, as if time was slowing down. Lisa approached him, but stopped halfway. "Are you sure?" "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. Andrew looked at her and realized that his decision did not depend on them. It was his inner awareness. He knew that they could not continue to exist in this endless day. He took the handle. "We have to stop being afraid," he said, and with each word his confidence grew. The door opened. And at that moment, the world in front of him changed. There was no light, no darkness. There was no house, no street. He stood in front of the void, but he felt no fear. The silence was absolute. It was only then that he realized that the house they called their own was nothing more than a reflection of their own fear. And now that they have stopped being afraid, they are free. But in the void, he realized something important. Reality was just a matter of choice. Andrew took a step forward.